Okay, I have to be honest with you. Usually, when I prep for these deep dives, I have a pretty good idea of the lane we're in.
Right.
We're either doing a tech episode or a politics episode or, maybe a history lesson. It's neat. It's tidy.
And today is not tidy.
Not even close. Today, the stack of sources you've brought to the table is, well, it's a collision. We've got modern geopolitical headlines, specifically about Donald Trump's new appointments.
Yeah.
Smashing headfirst into this really obscure 1940s technocratic theory. And then, just for good measure, we're landing right in the middle of ancient biblical prophecy.
It sounds like a conspiracy theory salad when you say it like that, but when you actually sit down and read through the source material and you watch the videos, there's a very specific, very cohesive narrative being built.
Okay.
The argument here isn't just that we're watching a government transition, it's that we're watching a script play out. A script that involves the end times, a new world order, and, a fundamental rewriting of how people buy, sell, and live.
So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack that script. We need to figure out why these sources are drawing a straight line from, of all people, Elon Musk's grandfather, all the way to the book of Revelation.
And why a diplomatic committee in the Middle East is triggering alarms about the apocalypse. To do that, we have to start with the catalyst, the Board of Peace.
Right. This is the central mystery. On paper, it sounds like standard diplomatic procedure. Trump announces a board of peace for the Middle East. You'd expect envoys, maybe a few generals.
Sure.
But the sources are absolutely obsessed with the specific roster. They're calling it the 10 Kings.
It's not just who they are. It's the combination of power they represent. You have the political heavyweights you'd expect, obviously. Yeah.
Tony
Blair, former UK Prime Minister, he's on there.
Yeah.
You've got Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State. Steve Witt, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East. And Jared Kushner, naturally, given his work on the Abraham Accords.
And those names make sense for a diplomatic mission. They're kind of the face of the operation. But then you have the inclusion of what the source specifically calls the technocrats. And this is where it gets weird.
This is where the texture of the board changes completely. You have Mark Rowan, who's the CEO of Apollo Global Management, a massive, massive private equity player.
A billionaire.
A huge one. And crucially, you have Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank.
That's the one that sticks out to me. Why does the president of the World Bank need to be on a peace treaty board?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. If you are there to negotiate borders or ceasefires, you bring diplomats. If you bring in the head of the World Bank and a private equity CEO, you are not just negotiating peace. You're restructuring an entire economic system.
So the peace being offered is financial.
It suggests that, yeah. It signals that this board has the power to pull economic levers, not just political ones.
And then there are the anomalies, the names that just don't fit the geographic box. Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, is listed as a founding member.
Which is baffling if the focus is solely on Gaza. Milei's inclusion signals that the scope of this board is probably global. It's not a regional committee, it's something bigger, a supranational body.
But the one that really sent the source down the rabbit hole, and I tried to verify this myself, and it is genuinely weird, is this Robert Gabriel character.
The listed U.S. National Security Advisor.
Right. And in this day and age, everyone has a digital footprint, a LinkedIn, an old conference photo, something. The source explicitly claims, I can't find one pic of this man.
Which is extremely rare. For a high-level appointee involved in what might be the most significant geopolitical board of the decade to be a ghost, it adds this layer of opacity that just fuels suspicion.
The source even says he hasn't been revealed yet.
Yeah, which implies he's being hidden for a reason. And then you have Nikolai Lenov, a Bulgarian politician. The source seemed pretty unsettled by him too, just calling him creepy.
So it's this mix of global finance, missing men, political heavyweights. But let's pivot to the core argument. The source isn't just worried about the people, they're worried about the philosophy. And it all hangs on one specific word Donald Trump used.
Technocratic.
Exactly. He said, quote, "As chairman of the Board of Peace, I am backing a newly appointed Palestinian technocratic government." Now, to the average person, technocratic just sounds like run by experts.
Right, it sounds efficient. Like, oh good, the engineers are in charge, the potholes will get fixed.
But that's not what this source hears. Why is this a trigger word?
Because in this context, technocracy isn't just an adjective, it's a noun. It refers to a specific historical movement with a very, very specific blueprint for society. To understand why the source is freaking out, we have to go back to the 1930s and 40s.
And this is where the Elon Musk connection comes in, which I did not see coming at all.
It is. The sources pull up the history of a man named Joshua Haldeman, who was, yes, the grandfather of Elon Musk, but more importantly, he was a key leader in a movement called Technocracy, Inc.
Okay, so what did Technocracy, Inc. actually believe? What was Grandpa Musk trying to build?
Well, their core thesis was that politicians were obsolete. They believed that a modern industrial society was just too complex for elected officials, who were basically just popularity contest winners to handle.
They wanted to replace them.
With an elite group of technical experts, engineers, scientists, economists, they wanted to turn all of North America into something they called a technate.
The source actually provided a map of this technate, and it's wild. It's not the map we learned in school.
No. It essentially dissolves the borders between Greenland, Canada, the United States, Mexico, and even Venezuela. It creates one massive administrative resource zone.
And the source points out that recently Trump has been talking about buying Greenland, and he's been heavily involved in Venezuelan policy. They argue he's kind of mirroring this old map.
It's a striking parallel. The source argues Trump is effectively trying to recreate this technate of America. But the map is just geography. The really radical part of Haldeman's technocracy was the economic system. They wanted to abolish money.
Abolish money, like go back to bartering or something?
No, go forward to physics. They argued that price systems were flawed because money is arbitrary. Instead, they proposed energy distribution cards.
Okay, explain that to me. How do you buy a loaf of bread with energy?
Think of it like a calorie count, but for everything you consume. It takes a certain amount of energy to grow the wheat, bake the bread, ship it to the store. That is the energy cost of the bread.
I see.
You, as a citizen, would get an energy allowance, a quota on your card. When you buy the bread, that energy cost is just deducted from your balance.
So it's a resource-based economy. You can't hoard wealth because you can't hoard energy credit.
Precisely. It's the ultimate form of a controlled economy. And the source makes a terrifying connection to the present day. Back in 1940, with paper cards and vacuum tubes, they didn't have the computing power to track everything.
But today?
Today, we have the infrastructure, and we call it a carbon footprint.
Oh, wow, okay.
Bingo. The source argues that modern carbon tracking and digital IDs are just the 21st century implementation of Joshua Haldeman's energy card. If you have a digital wallet that tracks your carbon impact and limits your purchasing power based on it, you have effectively instated the Technocracy, Inc. plan.
So when Trump says he's backing a technocratic government in Palestine, the source thinks this is the test run, the sandbox.
That's the fear, that they're using Palestine to implement the digital ID, the biometric tracking, the resource allocation, all under the guise of peace and reconstruction. And once the system's debugged, you roll it out to the U.S.
That really changes the picture of universal basic income, doesn't it? Because the source mentions this shift in language. We usually hear UBI, universal basic income. But now they're hearing universal high income.
Right, which sounds great on the surface, high income for everyone. But the source is incredibly skeptical. They ask, high compared to who? If everyone is on the same energy allowance and the technocrats control it, it's not wealth. It's a control grid disguised as a welfare system.
You're completely dependent on the state or the board for your survival.
And this brings us right to the New World Order angle. The source links this directly to the World Economic Forum.
And Davos.
They do. They point out that Trump is scheduled to give a keynote at Davos. The source views this as him either kissing the ring or, maybe taking the throne of this new system.
There's that clip they reference from Justin Trudeau that really lands the point. He actually uses the phrase New World Order.
It validates the paranoia, doesn't it? When world leaders explicitly use the terminology that people have been warning about for decades, it just blurs the line between theory and reality.
So we have the political structure, the board, we have the economic mechanism, technocracy, and these energy cards, but the source argues you can't understand the timing of this without looking at the theology. This is where we get into the 10 Kings.
This is the third pillar of the argument. The source cites Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation chapter 17.
I haven't cracked open the book of Daniel in a while. Walk us through the specific prophecy they're citing here.
So in these texts, the prophet describes a vision of this terrifying beast that represents a final world empire. And this beast has 10 horns. The scripture explicitly interprets these horns as 10 kings who will arise and give their power to the beast.
And the source is doing a literal head count on the Board of Peace.
Exactly. They look at the roster we just discussed, Blair, Rubio, Milei, the technocrats, and they count approximately 10 key leaders from Western and Arab nations. To the source, this is not a coincidence. They believe this board is the physical manifestation of those 10 kings.
So the argument is this board won't just manage a ceasefire, it's set up to become a global governing body.
Yes, a supranational kingdom that supersedes individual nations, deciding on trade, peace, and, if the technocracy angle holds, resource distribution.
But there's a nuance in the prophecy about a little horn, right? It's not just about the 10.
Correct. The prophecy in Daniel says that after the 10 arise, another horn comes up among them, a little one. This figure is distinct, often interpreted as the Antichrist figure, who will subdue 3 of the first kings.
And the source seems conflicted on where Trump fits into this. Is he the chairman overseeing the 10? Or is he this little horn?
They point to a very specific branding change as a major signal. The source claims that the U.S. Institute of Peace was renamed the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace.
Placing his name on peace itself.
Exactly. And this ties directly into the peace and safety warning.
This is the verse from Thessalonians. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them.
Right. The source highlights how that specific phrase, peace and security, is plastered all over UN documents and is the literal name of the Board of Peace. They argue that the world is shouting the trigger phrase for the apocalypse.
It is eerie how much the language aligns. But let's go back to the mechanism of control, because the source brings Tony Blair back into the picture here.
Tony Blair is pivotal to their argument because of his track record. The source plays a clip of Blair explicitly stating the need for digital infrastructure to know, quote, who has been vaccinated and who hasn't.
He says it so casually, like it's just a logistics problem.
But for the source, this is the mark of the beast infrastructure. Now we have to be specific here, because they make a distinction I found really interesting. A lot of people think the mark is a microchip or Neuralink.
Right, the brain chip.
The source says no. They argue Neuralink is part of the ecosystem, and they mention a quote attributed to Elon Musk and the Nokia CEO about cell phones being basically obsolete by 2030 because the tech will be in our bodies.
The death of the cell phone.
Yes. The idea that by 2030 you won't carry a device. You will be the device. But the source doesn't think the brain chip is the mark.
So what do they identify as the mark then?
They point to a patch technology, allegedly backed by Bill Gates, that uses something called quantum dots.
Quantum dots. That sounds like something from a Marvel movie.
It's real technology. They're microscopic crystals that can create a record on your skin, almost like an invisible tattoo. They can be scanned to verify identity. The source argues this is the mechanism. It ties it all back together. If you don't have the patch, the mark, you can't access the digital ledger, the energy card, and therefore you cannot buy or sell.
So let's put the whole picture together. The source is arguing that the board, who are the 10 kings, implements the peace treaty, which is the trigger.
Which sets up a technocratic government, the beast system, using digital IDs and quantum dots, the mark, to control all commerce.
That is the Tribulation Times narrative. It's a cohesive story of collapse and replacement.
And they see it happening fast. That Agenda 2030 date comes up again and again in these documents, whether it's the WEF goals, the death of the smartphone, or the full implementation of this carbon tracking grid.
You know, this stack feels heavy. It's taking things we see on the news every day, Jared Kushner, Tony Blair, a peace deal, and reframing them as the final act of human history.
It changes how you see the news. And even if you're a total skeptic and you don't buy the prophecy angle at all, the source is highlighting very real trends. The centralization of power is real. The move toward technocratic governance, where unelected experts make the rules. That's real.
That's the thing. You don't have to believe in the little horn to be concerned about an energy distribution card that decides if you can buy groceries.
Exactly. The prophecy provides the narrative framework for the source, but the technological and political pieces are tangible. They are happening in boardrooms and labs right now.
It also reframes the whole idea of peace. Usually we think of peace as the ultimate good, but in this framework, peace is a Trojan horse.
It is. It's the calm that brings the storm.
So we've gone from 1940s Canadian technocrats and Elon Musk's grandfather all the way to ancient Babylon, the modern-day Washington, D.C., and the World Bank. It's a massive web.
A true deep dive. It shows that sometimes, to understand the headline, you have to read the footnotes from 80 years ago and the verses from 2,000 years ago.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave the listener with one final thought. The source focused so much on that little horn prophecy, the figure who starts small or comes up among the others but ends up subduing them.
The power behind the throne.
Right. If this board of peace is the stage, and these 10 heavy hitters, Blair, Rubio, Milei, the billionaires, are the actors we can see, who is waiting in the wings?
That is the question.
Is the real power player someone we haven't even focused on yet? Maybe that Robert Gabriel figure isn't missing. Maybe he's just invisible for now.
It certainly keeps you watching the shadows.
Keep your eyes open, whether you view this as prophecy or just high-stakes politics. We'll see you in the next deep dive.